What's up everybody, this is How To Tech and we're going to go ahead and fix this Samsung Galaxy S8. First step we need to do is pull out the SIM card. So go ahead and take your SIM card tool and pop that in and just pull that right out. Now this will be a screen replacement front and back, so we will need to start from the back and heat it up with a heat gun. I use a hot air soldering iron cranked up to as hot as it will go. And we'll go around the back a little bit here and just get it nice and warm. You can see that the back glass on this phone is shattered, so I'm not too concerned about removing it. Now, if you are trying to preserve your back glass, you're going to want to apply lots of heat. With this being a waterproof device, this is adhered very well to the mid-frame of the phone. And where you start at, you're going to want to make sure you get it nice and warm. This will require more heat than prior phones that are not waterproof, just because the adhesive is so thick. Go ahead and insert our pry tool down here at the bottom and push it in a little bit deeper. And then if you're looking to not scratch the paint on the back glass, I would suggest using something like a playing card, although it does make it a little bit harder to get around the adhesive on the back side of the phone. You will have to apply heat to this multiple times through the removal process. You'll feel that the playing card or the tool you're using will kind of get stuck and will not want to move. That is the cue to use more heat. We're going to start down just the side of the phone, so we're going to focus the heat on the area in which we want to push the card into. You can use a sawing motion to help it kind of pry its way through the back of the device. Now there is adhesive right below where that says Galaxy S8 on the back. There's also a ribbon cable on the back of the device underneath the camera. You'll also want to be careful to make sure that when you're doing this that your playing card does not go under the wireless charge mat on the back of the device as well. So try to keep it as close to the back glass as possible. You can see that I hit a snag, so I'm going to go ahead and get this nice and warm to help us pry the back off as well. Especially in the splintered glass areas, you may need to get that fairly warm to go ahead and get that to pry up. You can see with that additional heat, it's much easier to remove the glass when it's fractured. You do want to be careful not to overheat the device, as you can melt the plastic internals. You will have to apply heat multiple times and try to focus that heat on the side of the device or the area where you're going to start removing the adhesive. Once it's nice and warm, just go ahead and move your card in that sawing motion. And right as you get above the Galaxy S8 logo, you want to make sure that you're kind of careful about the wireless charge mat behind the phone. So if you feel a lot of resistance, you may want to stop and just kind of try to pry it open and check. Once you get towards the top of the device or on the camera, you don't want to put your playing card in too deep, as there is the ribbon cable for the fingerprint sensor that runs underneath the camera. I ran out of heat, so we're going to go ahead and apply more, help that card move along the top portion of the device. It seems like the back glass is less pliable in this area, so just be careful as you're moving your playing card around. You don't want to crack the glass if you're looking to save it. We'll go ahead and move the card around the top of the device. You can kind of see the adhesive ripple underneath the screen as you move the playing card around it. I use this one down here at the bottom to help keep the back from re-adhering itself. This is really sticky adhesive, and it will actually kind of set itself back down and make it difficult to get back up. I'm just going to take a peek in here, see if I can't see that ribbon cable. You can see it. Can't see it on camera, but it's just right below the camera. We'll go ahead and continue working our way around the top of the device. We've applied more heat, and that will get us around all the adhesive. We can kind of use the playing card that we stuck in underneath the charge mat to help us kind of pull up and lift the back of the device off. Now we can see the ribbon cable. Go ahead and insert our pry tool here and just kind of twist it, and that'll pop the cable right off the back of the phone. You can see the connection just right below the camera there and on the back of the device. Now if you do need to replace your back glass, you will need to remove the small parts, and they are held on with adhesive, so we're going to use our heat gun once again to go ahead and get those nice and warm, and then we can use our metal tool or our playing card as well to kind of pry these up. And you just want to be careful to not bend anything here. These are still waterproof, adhered to the display, so the adhesive is pretty strong. You can see it's kind of got this little gasket here. If you can remove that with the fingerprint sensor, that will make it a little bit easier to reassemble. It doesn't seem like it's going to be that easy to remove using a pair of tweezers and kind of gently prying it up. It's still kind of deformed the piece of adhesive, so if you can find the original stuff, that's great. If not, you can just use some double-sided sticky tape. We'll go ahead and heat up the rear camera glass and get that ready to remove. Now this is held on with a piece of metal, so we'll have to be really gentle to not bend this. And I did bend this a little bit trying to remove it, and I would suggest rather than using this iSesamo or this piece of metal tool to use a piece of playing card or plastic to help pull it up. It's using the exact same adhesive that the fingerprint sensor was, so it's on there really well, and it's really difficult to get up. You can't twist it. It's got this little piece of metal that'll bend, and we definitely don't want that to bend. So just take your time. And the playing card seems to work just a little bit better because it's a little bit thinner. Apply more heat if you need to, and try to get that to move around that back side. And there's a little bit of kind of a built-up adhesive here at the bottom of it that's holding it all down. Perfect. So we can go ahead and get that removed. You can see that the gasket is wanting to pull up here also. We'll talk about the reassembly of this back panel in the reassembly video. Let's go ahead and start removing the screws. There are 14 of them marked in the flashing video there. Once we have those removed, we can go ahead and start working up the wireless charge mat. Work our way down the side of the device. This is actually stuck in here quite well compared to what I've seen on other phones. Once the screws are out, it can be a little bit tricky to pull that piece of plastic out. You can see that we have our connections for the wireless charge mat on the opposite side. And the part that was the most difficult to get out was this portion down here for the loudspeaker at the bottom of the device. This piece is really just snapped in here into place quite well, to the point where I almost thought that I had forgotten a screw. So just take your time and kind of wiggle it back and forth until this pries out. It seemed like it was stuck just right here in the corner, so moving my spudger down in that area kind of helped pop it out. There's our loudspeaker, and this is kind of one of the issues with it. The phone is, people are saying the loudspeaker doesn't want to stay connected. It could be loose. Pressing down on that portion of the rear of the phone will make it connect. There's two little kind of standoffs that it hits right next to that gray and blue cable. If that's your issue, you could kind of push those up a little bit and possibly gain that connection. I'm going to go ahead and pop the battery off. Now if you're looking to replace your screen, you could stop here in the disassembly, pop the ribbon cable connector off for your screen, flip it over, heat it up, and just kind of skip ahead in the video to where we start removing the screen. We're going to go ahead and pop all the cables off here now that we can find on the device. Now the one thing that I like to do is I like to remove the motherboard and possibly the daughter board out of here, because you're going to be manhandling this as you're removing the screen. We don't want anything to happen to the board. These little snap-on connectors can be a little bit tricky, so make sure you put your spudger underneath the kind of the fat side of the connector there and pry it up. We have one more connector to unsnap. Just down here at the bottom, the base of the motherboard. Once that's disconnected, you can go ahead and pull the motherboard out of the device. You may have to use your pry tool to pop up the bottom connection, just at the bottom of the charge port ribbon cable right there. See, it snaps on the back side of the motherboard. We do have our camera here, so if we're looking to replace that, it does just unsnap like all the other connectors on the device. It does look like it has a little bit of adhesive holding it in place, so you may have to kind of push it off and then pry it off of the back of the board. These guys, just a little bit of adhesive down here at the bottom, and two little posts will kind of snap into place when you put it back onto the motherboard itself. After that, the next step is to go ahead and remove the 6 screws down here holding in the bottom ribbon cable, which houses the charge port and the 3.5mm headphone jack. We're going to pull the headphone jack out first after we unsnap the ribbon cable. I'll go ahead and just pry it out of place. You can see it has a little tiny connector that hits against the middle of the frame. Now this ribbon cable has a kind of slot where it fits into down here at the bottom of the mid frame of the phone, so make sure you pull that out first. I'll go ahead and start prying out the charge port cable. One thing I love about Samsung phones is if you do damage your charge port, you can replace that separate from the motherboard, although you do have to rip through the back of the phone to get that out. There is some light adhesive underneath this, so we'll need to go ahead and pry it up nice and gentle. It'll kind of snap back out of place. It inserts charge port forward. With that done, we can go ahead and pull up the vibration module next. This little round doohickey here. We'll go ahead and use our tweezers just to get underneath it. It is adhered into the mid frame of the phone. So if your phone does stop vibrating, you would need to replace this module. We can pull out the front-facing camera assembly, also with some light adhesive into the glass and the mid-frame. Pull that out. You can see that we have our front-facing camera. And the earpiece speaker, now this part, you need to be careful with this. I actually pull the back housing of the speaker off separate from the actual speaker itself. It looks like it's still going to work just fine, but you want to be careful when prying that out. You can see right here it's disconnected itself. So make sure when you're pulling this out, you get underneath the earpiece speaker all the way down to the metal frame at the front, and not just the back housing of the speaker itself. This has basically a positive and a negative cable that attach to it, that attach to the two pads on it. So if you do pull the housing off, it's not the end of the world. Just kind of snap it back in. If you do break one of the two cables on the interior of it, you will have to replace it. Now we can go ahead and pull out the sensor assembly. It also just has a small amount of adhesive holding it in. You also see we have a water sensor there also. There's our module. We'll set that aside. Now to work on the battery, I'm going to use a metal pry tool first. I tried using a plastic gift card just to get it started. I couldn't even get that to happen. So once we get it started up, we'll use the gift card to get underneath the battery. You want to be careful because the screen underneath actually has a cutout in the mid frame the battery sits in. You don't want to damage the screen if you're looking to save that as well. Once the battery's out, you can remove all the adhesive out. And if you are looking to replace your volume button, Bixby power button, any of that stuff, the cables can be replaced. They're in these little metal housings, and they're a little bit of a pain to get out. You want to pry the cable up first, and then stick something in and pry up the metal housing of the power button. The button itself is on the mid frame, the metal portion, but the actual clicking or the sensor portion of the button being pressed is housed inside of this metal on metal housing, and it's just basically wraps around and sits on the housing. It's kind of like an iPhone if you've seen the power button on those. You can see the button right there under the yellow foil. And that just slides back in place. You can do the same thing with the Bixby volume up, volume down button. So that's it for the disassembly of the phone. Check out the video located on this end screen here if you're looking to do the full screen replacement. If you're replacing just the housing, you can essentially stop here and then insert all of the other items back in and watch the reassembly video if you want to follow that through. As always, I appreciate you watching. Hit that like button, subscribe, share this out to the world, and I appreciate you. Catch you in the next one. Peace.